Welcome back to the wilderness, and today's going to be a bit more of a casual video as we discuss Taissa Turner and ask the question, is she an evil person? Before you jump to the comments, you need to know that I do not think that she is, but she has done some questionable things in pursuit of her goals, and the question is, why? Is she mentally ill, as damaged as the rest of the Yellowjackets, or something else entirely? Of the main characters in this story, she is definitely the most tame as far as crimes go, but she isn't exempt from the evil that has surrounded the Yellowjackets over the years. Unlike her teammates, Shauna being motivated by bloodlust, Misty by acceptance, and Lottie by delusion, Taissa seems motivated by ambition, wanting to be the best at everything she sets her mind to, and proving her worth to those around her. However, this is only part of her personality. I believe she has another part of her that is genuinely a good person. We see this when she interacts with her girlfriend, wife, and son, and her teammates. But it's these two aspects of her personality that we find warring with each other throughout the show. I'm not going to go beat by beat like I have for the other videos discussing the Yellowjackets, but mostly focus more on the important moments of her story, and possible explanations for why she does what she does. If you feel I may have missed something, don't hesitate to correct me in the comments. In my last video about Lottie, I made a few mistakes, so I'll try to learn from them. Also, I am not an expert on mental disorders, so these are just my opinions formed through extensive research. Also, I'm not going to bother talking about the man with no eyes, because if the show isn't going to address it, then why should I? With all that out of the way, on with the show. Right off the bat, we see Taissa as an ambitious, intelligent, and pragmatic young woman, but we see this when she schemes to freeze out one of her teammates, Allie, during a soccer scrimmage, thinking that she won't be able to hold her own in the championships. Sadly, this plan actually works, but ends up with Taissa breaking Allie's leg. We see Taissa express regret for breaking her leg a little bit later, but she doesn't regret her decision to freeze her out. In fact, she sees it as doing her a favor. This shows me that she's a very ends justify the means kind of person, but also shows a varying degree of narcissism and arrogance. She was going to do it to Allie whether her team agreed with her or not, as she thought it was best and no one was going to convince her otherwise. These are the two halves of her person that we see come into conflict with each other. The goodness she is as a person, and the horrible things she feels she has to do, later manifesting into what the others would call other Ty. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Starting not long after the group found the cabin, Taissa comes up with a plan to hike out of the wilderness to try and find help, using the logic that if they just keep going, they're bound to hit something. So she recruits Marie, Misty, Van, and Aquila in an attempt to venture out of the wilderness. But things almost immediately go wrong as later in the night they are attacked by a pack of wolves and nearly kill Van. Taissa was tasked with keeping watch for the night, but she had fallen asleep, and once she had woken up, she found herself up a tree, having sleepwalked into the tree. Thankfully, she was able to come back down to help save the others in time, and retreat back to the cabin. Her sleepwalking spells continue, Van having to resort to tethering the two so that Taissa doesn't leave the cabin. A few things that she has done while she's sleepwalking is eating dirt, climbing trees, and nearly walking off a cliff. While this last part didn't happen while she was asleep, it's important to note. After the feast of Jackie, Taissa claims to have no memory of it, but when she's convinced of what she had done, she pukes it all up. Now is as good a time as any to talk about the likely disorders Taissa might have. First off, let's discuss her sleepwalking. There are definitely a few causes, but in Ty's case, it's likely a combination of PTSD and anxiety. In my opinion, it's when she's in this state that her subconscious starts acting out. For example, when she's eating dirt, she's probably just starving and needs to eat. Climbing a tree in her sleep is probably her subconscious wanting to protect herself. Many fans speculate that Taissa has dissociative identity disorder or split personality disorder, but Contrary to what TikTok might have you think, DID is rare and nearly impossible to diagnose. My guess is she likely has a very aggressive form of dissociative fugue disorder or dissociative amnesia. While these two are similar in some respects, there are some key differences. First off, DID exhibits as an actual personality, or one or more people being inside the same body, whereas fugue state is someone who has temporarily lost their memory of who they are, important details of their lives, or in extreme cases just start wandering off. Fugue is also temporary, possibly lasting a few hours to maybe even a couple of months, while DID is a long-lasting condition. Regardless, both disorders often accompany severe trauma. If we take this and apply it to Taissa, it's likely this has been brought on by a combination of the trauma of the crash, the cannibalizing of her friends, and the pressure she puts on herself, as well as the secret of being a gay woman in the late 90s. This can all add up to a Disneyland of disorders. I do want to mention, though, that she does get some reprieve when she joins Lottie's prayer circles. While she does this for Van's sake and still doesn't believe in it all, it does end up helping her, because, in my opinion, this is Taissa dealing with her issues in a healthier manner. She's meditating, talking about her struggles, and growing closer to those around her, especially Van, and she's no longer repressing the things she feels guilt or shame for. Much like Lottie, I think she has a strong desire to be free, to not have the pressures of high school, college, and eventual career, and to be with the woman she loves without judgment. But, just like Lottie, this freedom is threatened by the arrival of the scientists. Later, she tells Van she wants to stay behind in the wilderness because there's no guarantee that the two can be together once they return home. I feel this is only half true. She also wants to make sure that the scientists don't talk about seeing them cannibalizing someone, and the fact that Lottie killed one of their own doesn't guarantee their silence. That's why I think Taissa intends to kill Hannah by fixing the draw when they decide to hunt. It's going to be up to you whether or not you think this is evil. Hannah is, by all accounts, innocent, who wasn't a part of the craziness of the wilderness. I mean, sure, she killed Cody, but only as a way of self-preservation, seeing as how Shauna was looking for any excuse to end her life. Taissa sees Hannah as a threat, not just a rescue, but would likely talk about what she saw as soon as they get back. So, she wants Van to fix the draw. Van, on the other hand, sees this as going against everything they've come to believe, like letting the wilderness choose, but ultimately relents and fixes the draw. Unfortunately, thanks to Shauna, Hannah wasn't picked, and it was Marie instead. But is that Taissa and Van's fault? Honestly, I think it's a bit of a stretch. Van had to fix the cards as soon as they got into a circle, so she would know which cards landed for which person, and who would end up getting the Queen of Hearts. True, they didn't know Shauna was going to mess it up, but if they hadn't tried to rig it in the first place, it may not have landed on Marie. I honestly don't know. What do you guys think? Regardless, this is, once again, Taissa thinking she knows what's best, and makes the choice without everyone's consent or input, with deadly consequences. Of all the Yellowjackets, we know the most about Taissa after returning from the wilderness. She attended Howard for pre-law with a double major in history and philosophy, was first string on the soccer team, and graduated first in her class. She then went on to Columbia Law before landing an internship in one of the biggest firms in the city. It's also kind of worth mentioning that she dated a lot of hot women over those years. By 2021, she has been married to a woman named Simone for approximately 15 years. They have a son together named Sammy, and a dog named Biscuit, and now plans to be a state senator. Personally, I think all politicians are evil, but I'll put those biases aside for the sake of this video. Because of the nature of Taissa's past, this is a very bold and selfish move on her part. Politics is a very dirty game, one that not only affects the person running, but everyone around them. In Taissa's case, all of the Yellowjackets would be a target. But it's Taissa's life. Does she need their input in her career choices? I mean, if she was a doctor or a lawyer, probably not, but I think the Yellowjackets have every right to be upset at Taissa doing this, especially considering the fact that they all agreed to stay out of the public eye upon returning. Taissa is aware of the dirty tricks her opponent is likely to use, so to test her team, she hires the fixer, Jessica Roberts, to try and bribe the others to see if any of them would talk and ruin her career. This, along with the blackmail by Jeff, are catalysts that throw the Yellowjackets into turmoil in the present day. That's another thing fans are kind of divided by. Who started the chaos for the present day Yellowjackets? Taissa or Jeff? Honestly, I think there are three main culprits here: Ty, Jeff, and Shauna. Taissa announced her candidacy for state senator, which was going to invite anyone who wanted to find dirt on her to use against her. She then hired the fixer to snoop around, but then Jeff tried to extort money from the Yellowjackets. But if Shauna hadn't had the journals, he wouldn't have had the information he needed to do it. You know, for someone who forced the Yellowjackets to stay in the wilderness so no one found out about what they did, but then had it all written down anyways, is pretty stupid. It's my opinion that none of the Yellowjackets have dealt with their past in the wilderness in a healthy and constructive manner, save for maybe Van. But it is especially true for Taissa. As soon as the craziness begins, her sleepwalking resumes, causing her to start climbing the trees outside her son's room, eating dirt, self-harm, frightening her wife and son, killing their dog, and creating an altar with his heart and head. Simone, after stumbling upon this horror, is rightfully terrified and tells Ty to get professional help, but Ty doesn't do this. Instead, she just tries to keep herself awake. Predictably, this only continues her downward spiral into madness, as staying awake for days on end causes her to hallucinate spending a day with her son. But thinking he had mysteriously vanished, she and Simone try to find him. Halfway into the search, Simone gets a call from the school saying Sammy had been there the whole time, leading to the two beginning to argue. And during the argument, Taissa, or the other Ty, swerves the car into oncoming traffic. Why did her darker half do this? Perhaps it was a way of self-preservation? Getting help would require her talking about her problems, her past, and facing it head on. But someone as narcissistic as Taissa wouldn't be able to do this, and instead of facing her problems, she runs from them, leaving Simone in the hospital and Sammy without his mothers. During the fugue episode, after running away from the hospital, she finds herself at Van's shop. Some people may look at this as Ty simply going back to her first love, and while I think that's somewhat true, I think it's most likely Ty is going back to what's familiar to her. A time in her life when everything was simple that made sense. By going back to Van, and by extension the wilderness, Van in a way represents the wilderness. That place was the place where the two shared their passionate moments, and more literally, Van carries the scars of the wilderness with her. I think the relationship between the two is actually quite toxic, as Van doesn't stand up to Taissa even when she knows Ty's in the wrong. Taissa and Van knew fixing the draw was wrong, but they did it anyway. They knew dining and dashing was wrong, but they did it anyway. And they end up causing the death of a man, an innocent man, mind you, that chased after them. After this, though, when Van's diagnosis of cancer seems to get better, Taissa gets it in her head that, in order to save Van, she needs to trade other lives for Van. Van disagrees, but of course Taissa does it anyway, and while she doesn't take any lives on purpose, she is more than willing to do so. I don't think this is because she loves Van, but because, as I mentioned before, Van is Taissa's lifeline to the wilderness, and the freedom that the wilderness had to offer. She cares about Van, she cares about all of them, but not as much as she cares about herself. I don't think Taissa caused Van's death, as Melissa was simply protecting herself and the life she had built. Kind of as a side note, I don't think Melissa is evil either, but I don't think she's mentally sound. Faking your death and marrying the woman whose mother, Hannah, you likely had a hand in killing doesn't scream healthy to me. Perhaps this is Melissa's way of hanging on to the wilderness. Every time she looks at her wife, she'll remember the woman they terrorized in the forest. Season 4 is on its way, so we'll just have to see. After the death of Van, Taissa comes to the conclusion that it's all Shauna's fault, and is seen conspiring with Misty to make sure Shauna isn't the last woman standing. You're probably wondering why I'm choosing to end the video here. Well, I wasn't a huge fan of Taissa's character arc after season 2. What started out as one of the more fascinating characters in the show has devolved into a bland, uninteresting piece of cardboard that treats Van like luggage and seems to have forgotten all about her family or her newly acquired seat as a state senator. Even the actresses seem confused and are not sure what they're doing. But even after all this, is Tai an evil person? I really don't think so. But she's not a good person either. Her arrogance and pride make it so she doesn't consider others in her actions. And when things go wrong, she is quick to blame anyone but herself. I believe it's the guilt she feels that has caused her unconscious to lash out in other ways. What she does when she's disassociating isn't nearly as important as what she does that leads up to it. Lying, scheming, hiding, and selfishness all lead her down dark paths, leaving her not in control of her own actions. And it's those she claims to love that end up paying the highest price. If she gets professional help and proper therapy, I can't see any reason why she wouldn't be able to banish her demons to the darkest corners of her mind. But until then, we'll have to wait until we head back to the wilderness to see how this story continues. I'll see you there.